Dice Men chronicles the founding and early years of UK gaming giant Games Workshop. It is written by Sir Ian Livingstone, one of the company's 3 original founders, but contains contributions and quotations from a huge amount of people who were instrumental in the company's development. It covers the period from inception in 1975 until a management buyout in 1991, almost 20 years. There are 297 numbered pages, and this allows for a great deal of supporting material such as photographs and reproductions of early publications, documents and notes, making this a fascinating piece of ludo-archaeology. This is truly a biography, as the story is told through the words of those that were there, primarily Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, but also other instrumental figures such as Brian Ansell, Rick Priestley, Mark Gascoigne and so many more. If you only know the Modern Games Workshop plc with its flashy website, Warhammer branded stores and New York Times best-selling novels, then this is a real shock. Just as the Nintendo Corporation started out as a playing card manufacturer, Games Workshop began life hand-making wooden board games such as Go and Backgammon before importing the first ever copies of Dungeons & Dragons. Whilst the book covers the publication of Warhammer and 40k, if you want minute details about their development, refinement and evolution, this isn't the book for you. This is the journey of a couple of crazy cats from England who found themselves at the right place and time to start a tabletop revolution. Another quintessentially English feature is the pacing. This isn't a sensationalized tabloid expose or cliffhanger-ridden Netflix series. This is a cozy fireside chat with people in their 70s, reminiscing about a simpler time before the internet, social media and YouTube videos. This tone is clearly a feature, not a bug. If you were a child of the 60s, 70s or even 80s and can remember buying your first Citadel miniature, opening your copy of the white box D&D or attending a games day, the nostalgia levels are off the charts and this book is certainly for you. So let's give you a closer look. This is only available as a hardback book that measures 30 centimeters or 12 inches by 21.5 centimeters or about 8.5 inches. The spine is more than 2 centimeters or about an inch thick. Here is a piece of A4 paper and a regular paperback novel, along with similar hardback books. This volume is case-bound, which means the pages are stitched together in little bundles called signatures and sewn into a fabric backing that is glued to the cover. This should prolong the life of the book and stop individual pages becoming loose and falling out. It also means that it opens fully and lays flat on your lap or a table without any damage to the spine. There is no bookmark or page ribbon, sadly. It is covered in a matte waxed finish, which, if you are careful, is wiped clean. It also has what are called UV spot gloss highlights, meaning a different shiny ink has been overprinted. In this instance for the graphics and lettering on the front and spine, but not the back. Opening it up, there is a plain black end paper, which is the sheet glued to the cover. And Overleaf is the most Spartan of titles, Dice Men. Then you have the title again with the subtitle, The Origin Story of Games Workshop, and also other books by the co-authors, which are mostly fighting fantasy game books. Then the required legal mumbo-jumbo you find in most books, confirming the book was printed in China with the briefest of nods to using sustainable paper. Next we learn the book is dedicated to Gary Gygax, one of the founders of Dungeons & Dragons, which we will learn is very important to the Games Workshop story. Then there are 2 separate columns thanking the supporters and contributors separately. Finally, you have the table of contents promising about 18 years worth of history in 18 chapters. Overleaf is the title page for the foreword, and this gives you a feel for both the design and the character of the book. With 2 pages devoted to a single word, you are told that this is going to be a tale that takes its time and isn't going to cut out the minutiae in favour of cliffhangers or sensationalism. The foreword itself is a bit of how and why this book exists, some more thank yous and a lengthier dedication to the late Gary Gygax, without whom there may never have been a Games Workshop, or even the gaming industry that we take for granted today. Then you have the title page for Chapter 1. All chapters share this common title card with their number in both huge numerals and also in dice. This section explores life before Games Workshop in the 1960s for both the protagonist and tabletop gaming in Britain. Chapter 2 recounts how 3 school friends moved to London and decided to start up a games company. You have probably never heard of John Peake, but the legendary Games Workshop was created to sell the handmade wooden sets of backgammon, mancala and the like that John made in his bedroom. It is fascinating to see Games Workshop's first ever set of handwritten accounts when the company is worth only the £389 that they managed to scrape together or borrow from their parents. Chapter 3 details GW's first ever magazine. Long before White Dwarf, there was the equally catchy Owl and Weasel. 4 single-sided sheets of hand-typed content for 10 English pence, which would sometimes double up as the event programme for their early conventions. Chapter 4 is where everyone's life would change dramatically as Games Workshop were awarded the exclusive rights to distribute the revolutionary new game Dungeons & Dragons, which, because it was still the 1970s, was a similarly black and white hand-typed affair. Chapter 5 remembers GW's first ever convention, the 1977 Games Day in London, which quickly escalated into multiple conventions per year, including D&D Day, Northern Games Day, and Dragon Meet, which is still running today. Chapter 6 shows just how many tangents you can get away with if you self-publish. Although the destination is the well-known Gen Con game fair, most of the chapter is an extended road trip from New York to Wisconsin, via Los Angeles, and this is the clearest example of this book's charm. It isn't a dry chronicle of the rise of a faceless corporation, but a time capsule of fond memories of wide-eyed youths and their seat-of-the-pants gaming adventure. Chapter 7 gives details of Games Workshop's first ever office, a space so small that business meetings of more than 2 people had to be conducted outside. Chapter 8 explains the birth of White Dwarf, which, as Warhammer hadn't been invented yet, had articles on Dungeons & Dragons, Call of Cthulhu and Traveller. Chapter 9 covers the founding of Citadel Miniatures and the vital contribution by industry legend Brian Ansell. It concludes with 9 pages packed full of GW's earliest miniatures, lovingly painted, including the legendary Space Marine that appeared long before Warhammer 40k. Chapter 10 heralds the arrival of Warhammer in its various different forms, and they are not shy about naming and crediting all the individuals that helped bring it to life and letting many of them have their say about it. Chapter 11 sees the first ever dedicated Games Workshop store opening on April Fool's Day 1978 in West London, as well as the staff growing large enough to field 2 softball teams. Chapter 12 details many of Games Workshop's early board games, including a very thorough history of Talisman. It is packed with great stories, such as the time they published a game designed by the composer Lord Andrew Lloyd Webber, almost got sued by George Lucas, had bomb threats over the Falklands War, and answers the age-old question, did GW actually invent Jenga? Chapter 13 expands on the company's relationship with Dungeons & Dragons in the 1980s, including their publication of the legendary Fiend Folio and the brief existence of TSR UK. Chapter 14 sees the company expand into a chain of retail stores in the UK and then in the USA. Chapter 15 covers the inevitable arrival of video games and how this almost killed the company. Chapter 16 explains their continued expansion with dedicated warehousing, which only occasionally leaked. Chapter 17 finally addresses the fighting fantasy game books, which have been mentioned numerous times previously but without any detail. This highlights the fact that this isn't a strictly chronological account of events. Each chapter is themed around a product or an epoch, but these overlap with each other, giving a very fuzzy timeline, making it difficult for any historians but friendlier for the more casual reader. The final chapter sees the departure of Ian and Steve in a management buyout in 1991, before the beginning of the Tom Kirby era and the company going public. Then there is a page of credits for the photographs and the miniature painters, and a short biography for Ian and Steve. Next is an 8-page dual-column index, which is very comprehensive. Finally, there are 15 pages of backer names, as this book was financed by the world's first crowdfunding publisher, Unbound. Some of these names you may recognize or get a chuckle from. Sadly, there are 7 blank pages, which is a terrible waste, as these could easily have been filled with even more ephemera from the archives. And that's your lot. Let us know in the comments below if you want us to cover more books about the gaming industry or more Games Workshop items. And of course you don't have to subscribe or do any of that nonsense.